Nobody sat with Vexlith at lunch. Not because anyone disliked her exactly. It was simpler and sadder than that. Nobody knew how to sit with her at all. She was Threnian, one of maybe 6 on the entire orbital station, and the only one under the age of 30. Her kind didn't eat the way most species did. They didn't laugh the way most species did. They barely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, their words came out flat and careful, like every sentence had been checked twice before it left their mouth. The Threnians had joined the wider galactic community only 2 generations ago, and even now, most species treated them the way you'd treat a language you'd never bothered learning. Polite from a distance, avoided up close. Nobody meant any particular cruelty by it. That almost made it worse. Cruelty, at least, gets noticed and eventually addressed. Quiet, well-meaning avoidance just gets normalized until nobody remembers there was ever another way to behave. So she sat alone. Every day. At the same table, in the same corner, near the observation window where she could watch the stars slide by instead of watching the room ignore her. That was where Jake Ferris found her. He wasn't looking for company that day. He'd just gotten off a double shift in Cargo Bay 4. His uniform smelled like hydraulic fluid, and all he wanted was food that wasn't station-issued protein paste. Word had gotten around that the new synth kitchen on Deck 12 had finally cracked something close to real pizza. He carried 2 boxes back toward the crew quarters, still steaming, and passed by the observation lounge on the way. That was when he saw her. She was sitting exactly where she always sat, knees pulled up slightly, antennae drooping in the particular way Threnian antennae drooped when their owner was tired or sad or both. Jake didn't know much about Threnian body language. Almost nobody did. But something about the way she sat there, small and folded in on herself against that huge window full of stars, made him stop walking. He'd noticed her before, actually, in passing, the way you notice a piece of furniture that's always been in the same spot. He'd never really seen her before, though, not until that particular evening, when the light from the stars outside caught her at just the right angle and something about her posture reminded him, uncomfortably, of every time he'd ever felt invisible in a crowded room back home. He didn't plan what happened next. He just did it. "Hey," he said, stepping into the lounge. "You eaten yet?" Vexlith looked up, startled. Her large black eyes blinked once, slowly, the Threnian equivalent of a double-take. "I do not require the evening meal cycle," she said carefully. "Threnian metabolism operates on a different schedule than human." "That's not what I asked," Jake said, grinning. He held up one of the boxes. "I asked if you've eaten." She stared at the box like it might be a trick question. "I have not," she admitted. "Perfect." He set both boxes down on her table without waiting for permission and dropped into the seat across from her like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Because I have way too much pizza for one person, and if I eat both of these by myself, I'm gonna feel bad about myself for the rest of the week." Vexlith's antennae twitched, an expression Jake would later learn meant confusion mixed with something like hope. "Pizza," she repeated slowly, testing the word. "Pizza," Jake confirmed. "Best thing humans ever invented. And that's including space travel." She didn't touch it at first. She just watched him eat, the way someone watches an unfamiliar ritual, trying to understand the rules before participating. Jake didn't rush her. He talked instead about nothing important, about the cargo shipment that had gone sideways that morning, about how the new synth kitchen still couldn't get the crust quite right, but it was close enough that he wasn't complaining. Eventually, she reached out one thin, 4-fingered hand and picked up a slice. She examined it from several angles. "You just eat it," Jake said, trying not to laugh. "No ceremony required." She took a bite. Her antennae shot straight up, both of them rigid with surprise. "This is..." She paused, searching for the human word. "Good. This is very good." She took a second bite before he could even respond. Then a third, faster now, some careful reserve in her finally cracking under the simple, undeniable fact that the food in front of her was genuinely delicious. "Careful," Jake said, laughing despite himself. "Nobody's taking it from you." "I am aware," Vexlith said, not slowing down at all. "I am simply recalibrating my expectations of human cuisine." "Told you." Jake leaned back, satisfied, like he'd personally invented the recipe. So, how come you always eat alone? The question landed heavier than he meant it to. Vexlith's antennae drooped again, back to that tired posture he'd noticed from across the lounge. Threnians are not commonly understood, she said carefully. Our customs differ. Our communication differs. Most species find interaction with us difficult to navigate. It is easier for everyone if I remain apart. Easier for who? Jake asked. She didn't answer right away. For them, she finally said. Jake set his slice down. That's a load of garbage, he said, not unkindly. That's what people tell themselves when they don't want to put in the effort. It's not that you're hard to talk to. It's that most people are lazy, and it's easier to avoid something unfamiliar than to actually try understanding it. Vexlith's eyes widened slightly. You believe this? I know this, Jake said. I grew up on Earth. Trust me, humans have spent our entire history being terrible at this exact thing. We're really good at deciding someone's too different before we've even bothered getting to know them. It's not a Threnian problem. It's an everyone problem. She was quiet for a long moment, processing. You are not doing this, she observed. You are here. You are sharing this meal. You asked a direct question and waited for my answer instead of assuming it. Yeah, well, Jake shrugged, suddenly a little embarrassed. Somebody's gotta break the pattern eventually. Might as well be me, might as well be now, and might as well be over pizza. For the first time since Jake had walked into that lounge, Vexlith's antennae lifted into a position he didn't recognize yet, but would come to learn was the Threnian equivalent of a smile. Word got around the station fast, the way it always does on ships where everyone lives in each other's pockets. By the next day, 2 more crew members had wandered by the observation lounge during meal shift, curious enough to sit down at Vexlith's table uninvited, the way Jake had. By the end of the week, her corner table wasn't quiet anymore. It had become something closer to the unofficial social hub of Deck 12, mostly because word had spread that the Threnian girl who sat by the window had genuinely interesting things to say, if you actually gave her the chance to say them. Vexlith didn't quite know what to do with the sudden attention. I do not understand, she told Jake one evening, watching 2 engineers argue good-naturedly over the last slice of a pepperoni pie at the next table. For 11 months, no one approached this table. Now it does not stay empty. People follow examples, Jake said. Somebody had to go first. Once they saw it wasn't weird, or scary, or whatever they'd convinced themselves it would be, they stopped being afraid to try it themselves. You were the example. Guess so. He smiled. Didn't plan it that way. Just wanted pizza and didn't feel like eating alone either, that day. Vexlith considered this. That is a very small reason, she said, for something that changed quite a lot. Most good things start small, Jake said. Doesn't make them less real. There was an incident about 3 weeks in that Jake would later consider the real turning point, more than the pizza itself. A cargo drone malfunctioned during a routine transfer, and the resulting decompression alarm sent half of Deck 12 into a controlled panic. Most crew scattered toward the designated shelter zones, following drills they'd run 100 times. Vexlith, still new enough to full station protocols and unfamiliar with the specific alarm pattern, froze in the corridor instead, uncertain which direction meant safety. Jake found her there, 30 seconds from the automatic bulkhead seal, still trying to work out the correct evacuation route from memory. He didn't think. He just grabbed her arm and pulled her the right way, through the ceiling door with barely 2 seconds to spare. They stood together afterward, breathing hard. The bulkhead hissed shut behind them. You could have simply shouted the correct direction, Vexlith said, once she'd recovered enough to speak. Physical contact was not strictly necessary. Probably not, Jake admitted. Didn't have time to calculate the polite version. Just wanted you on the right side of that door. She looked at her arm, where his hand had been, an unreadable expression crossing her face. Thank you, she said simply. Anytime, Jake said. Try not to almost get sealed behind a bulkhead again, though. Bad for my heart rate. She made a sound then that he hadn't heard from her before, sharp and unexpected, and it took him a moment to realize it was laughter. Threnian laughter apparently sounded nothing like human laughter, but it was unmistakably the same thing underneath. "That was a joke," she said, sounding almost delighted with herself. "I believe I am improving at this." "You're a natural," Jake said, grinning. Not everyone on the station was thrilled about it. There was a particular faction among the older crew, humans and otherwise, who muttered about unnecessary fraternization and protocol concerns whenever a Threnian and a non-Threnian spent too much time together. One officer, a stiff, by-the-book lieutenant named Corvin, called Jake into his office about it directly. "You're spending a significant amount of time with the Threnian," Corvin said, not quite looking up from his console. "I want to understand your reasoning." "My reasoning is that she was sitting alone for almost a year, and that's messed up," Jake said flatly. "That's the whole reasoning. Threnian social customs are notoriously difficult to interpret," Corvin said. "There have been incidents on other stations. Misunderstandings. It would be simpler for everyone if we just left her alone?" Jake cut in. "Yeah, I heard that one already. Turns out simpler isn't the same as right." Corvin finally looked up from his console, and for a moment, something almost tired crossed his face. "I've served on 4 different stations, Ferris. I've seen what happens when integration goes badly. Riots, reassignments, careers ended over a single cultural misstep nobody intended. I'm not the villain here. I'm trying to prevent something worse than a girl eating alone." "With respect, sir," Jake said. "A girl eating alone for 11 months straight already is something worse. You just didn't have to look at it, because it didn't inconvenience anyone in a report." Corvin's jaw tightened. "I'm not telling you to stop. I'm telling you to be careful. Cross-species relations require sensitivity most crew members aren't trained for." "Then maybe the crew should get trained," Jake said, "instead of just deciding it's easier to keep people apart." He left the office without waiting to be dismissed, which probably wasn't great for his record, but he didn't especially care. Vexlith heard about the meeting anyway. News traveled fast on the station, in both directions. "You should not have argued with him on my behalf," she said that evening, back at their usual table, back at their usual pizza. "It could affect your standing." "Let it," Jake said. "Some things are worth a little trouble." "Why?" she asked, and there was something genuinely searching in the question, like she needed the actual answer, not a polite deflection. Jake thought about it for a moment before responding, because she deserved a real answer, not a quick one. "Because you spent almost a year sitting alone at this exact table," he said, "surrounded by hundreds of people who could have done what I did on any random day, and none of them bothered. That's not on you. That's on everyone else. And once I saw it, I couldn't exactly unsee it, you know? Couldn't just go back to being one more person who didn't bother." Vexlith's antennae lowered slightly, not in sadness this time, but in something quieter, something that looked almost like being moved. "On Threnian homeworld," she said slowly, "we have a concept, difficult to translate exactly. Closest human equivalent might be the one who turns toward you instead of away. It is considered rare. Valuable." "Yeah," Jake said. "What do you call it?" She said a word in her native language, soft and layered with tones no human throat could quite replicate. "I don't think I can pronounce that," Jake admitted. "No," she agreed, and there was warmth in it now, unmistakable even to someone as unfamiliar with Threnian expression as Jake was. "But you do not need to pronounce it. You only needed to become it." Months passed. The station kept turning through its long, quiet orbit, and the observation lounge kept filling up most evenings, a rotating cast of crew members drawn in by nothing more complicated than good food and the growing sense that Vexlith's table was, somehow, the friendliest place on the whole deck. Other Threnians on the station started noticing the shift too. One of the older ones, a quiet engineer named Threlka, who Jake had barely exchanged 3 words with in his whole time aboard, stopped him in the corridor one afternoon. "You are the human who sits with Vexlith," she said. It wasn't a question. "Guilty," Jake said. "She writes to her family on the homeworld," Threlka said. "She has mentioned you many times." They believe she has finally found a place that feels like home, out here among the stars, and they credit this to you. Jake didn't quite know what to say to that. I just brought pizza, he managed. You brought more than pizza, Threlka said. And there was something warm beneath her careful, formal Threnian phrasing. You brought the willingness to sit down. That is worth more than any species cuisine. She left before Jake could figure out a response, which was probably for the best, since he doubted he'd have found the right words anyway. Corvin never fully came around, but he stopped bringing it up, which on a station like this counted as a quiet kind of surrender. If anything, the reports on cross-species relations in his monthly logs had quietly, almost grudgingly, started using Deck 12's observation lounge as an example of what integration was supposed to look like. One evening, nearly a year after that first shared pizza, Jake noticed something different about Vexlith when he walked into the lounge. She was sitting at the table, same spot by the window, same posture. But surrounding her were 4 other crew members, laughing at something she'd apparently just said. And she wasn't sitting folded in on herself anymore. Her antennae were raised in that smiling position, easy and unguarded. She wasn't alone. She hadn't been alone in a long time. It was strange, Jake thought, watching her from the doorway, how something as small as 2 boxes of pizza could ripple out into something this big, this lasting, this alive. She spotted him in the doorway and waved him over. An entirely human gesture she'd clearly picked up somewhere along the way and adopted as her own. You're late, she said. The pizza is getting cold. Story of my life, Jake said, sliding into the seat that had, without anyone quite deciding it, become his. He looked around the table, at the mismatched group of species and stories and languages that had somehow found their way into orbit around one small, unassuming Threnian girl who used to eat alone by the window. All because somebody, on one ordinary day, had decided that carrying 2 pizza boxes back to his room was a worse idea than sharing them with the person sitting nearby who looked like she needed it most. You know, Vexlith said quietly, watching the table full of noise and laughter around them, I do not eat alone anymore. Nope, Jake agreed, grabbing a slice. And you never will again. Not on my watch. She didn't have a human word for what she felt in that moment, and she didn't need one. Her antennae said it for her.